really hope that you have enjoyed the conference. And for those of you that are new today, we pray that you take advantage of all the learning. Learn as much as possible. I have heard nothing but good remarks about the conference. Of course, and I tell people, of course, if there's bad remarks, they're not going to tell us, right? You can tell us later on. But yes, we really do welcome your feedback, whatever that we can better for next year. And yes, mark your calendars. Mark your calendars. With Dr. Canales' permission, we will be doing this conference, and it's going to be bigger and better next year. We are looking at this same week. Dr. Vicki Gibson is a national educational consultant, author, and speaker specializing in differentiated instruction and collaborative practice, behavioral and classroom management, reading instruction, and early childhood education. Dr. Gibson began her educational career working in public schools as a kindergarten teacher. If you want to learn to be a teacher, go to kindergarten. And that's right. And a learning disability specialist for 10 years. Dr. Gibson opened and directed and taught preschool in 3 private schools that served students ages 2 to 12 years. She also directed the development of a 4th school, Clay Academy, at the Potter's House in Dallas, Texas. Dr. Gibson taught as an adjunct professor at Texas A&M University for 10 years and completed her master's degree and PhD at TAMU in educational psychology. Currently, Dr. Gibson is CEO, chairman of an educational consulting group, Gibson, Hasbrook, and Associates, that provides high-quality professional development on-site and online for administrators and teachers. Dr. Gibson is the author of numerous curricula that are sold nationally, including McGraw-Hill's comprehensive reading programs. And before I continue, I want to give a very special round of applause to Mr. Ed Olguin. Would you please stand, Mr. Ed Olguin from McGraw-Hill, who has made this possible for us to have Dr. Vicki Gibson with us this morning. Dr. Gibson is an educational consultant for developing professional development materials and trainings published by Benchmark Education and a former author on iStation, a technology literacy program. She also serves on the advisory boards for the National Council for Teacher Quality and Teacher College's Dream Project, Columbia University in New York. Please help me welcome Dr. Vicki Gibson with a warm round of applause.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I think I'm mic'd on a lapel, so let's put this one down. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I love being back in Texas. I live in Texas. We're going to go kind of fast and furious. That's kind of my style. So I want to talk to you and clarify some of the misconceptions that we have about what differentiation instruction is. And so let's just begin with some of the questions that maybe we need to be addressing, like what is it really? Because a lot of us have been taught that if we change curriculum or if we change activities, we have differentiated instruction, and we have not. And then why do we need to change? And why do we need to be talking about the new revised TEKS? Well, I can tell you from working all over the United States that we've been trying to use the Common Core State Standard since 2009, and we've had great difficulty in implementing them in 9 years. So I highly suggest that you begin your discussions about the impact of the changes in the TEKS on practice, especially assessment. Then also, how do they affect what happens to you in the classrooms, what happens to your students, and how will that affect your report cards? We need to talk a little bit about that, and then how do we make it happen in classrooms? So if I get all that done in 45 minutes, It'll be surprising. All right, so let's talk about what just differentiating instruction is, because it's important that we know it means teaching differently. Say that to yourself, teaching differently, because instruction means teaching, and the root or base word of differentiation is different. I've been in education for a long time, and we've changed the standards, we've changed curriculum, we've changed classroom sizes, we changed everything, but we've never gone after the behavior of teaching. And why we're trying to go after the behavior of teaching is because we have now learned a lot more about how we learn and how we need to be teaching and how students practice. And I'm going to give you some of that information. But you already differentiate instruction. You just may not know it. How many of you, when you are talking to someone, you look at them and to see if they understand what you're talking about? And that's called the first RTI. How many of you have heard of RTI? There's 2 of them. And unfortunately, response to intervention is the one that most people know about. And it's because it came with money, and anything that comes with money gets our attention. But the first RTI is response to instruction. And it's the most important RTI, because as we teach, we should be monitoring students' response to instruction so that when they don't get the message, how many of you know that look? When they don't get the message, we need to be able to give immediate feedback at the point of need. And the problem with whole class lecture format is you can't closely monitor response to instruction, and so a lot of students think that they have it correctly, and they practice it incorrectly, and we don't catch it until an assessment. And so being able to be close enough to students at all grade levels so that we can monitor that RTI, that response to instruction, and change or do something differently at the point of need to clarify their understanding. So when you are looking at a student or an adult and you are monitoring their response, don't you change your behavior when you don't think they understood? You say it differently, you read it again, you do something. When you change your behavior based on what you saw and heard, that's what differentiating instruction is. It's an adjustment of the teacher or the adult's behavior to clarify an understanding. And that's why we haven't been able to achieve it, because we have yet to be able to master putting students into small groups beyond pre-K, kindergarten, first and second grade. In fact, my question always to administrators is, if I were to walk through your schools, would I see teachers working with every student every day, if you're in elementary, for at least 15 minutes in a small group? If I'm in your middle and high school, would I see teachers meeting in small group 15 minutes at least 2 times a week? Because that's the difference maker. And the reason it's the difference maker is because you are close enough to monitor the student's response to instruction and give feedback at the point of need and catch error before it becomes practiced. So differentiating instruction is changing the behavior of teaching. All right, so why do we need to change? First of all, it's because we know more. But secondly, we have a lot more information in the research, particularly since about 2005. We have the benefit of the computer since 2000, and we could actually look at how brains react and how they process information. Before that time, most of it was done on dead brain research. It was kind of against the law to cut open their head while they were alive and look in. But we now know how processing works a lot more, and we've learned a lot more about how we learn and what makes it stick. And then you've got changes in your outcomes change, and I'm going to identify those for you. So I want to just talk to you a second. First of all, we've learned that adults, and this is above average IQ adult research, that would be you, not the students you teach. Primary attention means focused and learning attention, and that's what you want to teach to. And secondary attention just lets you function. You're hearing this research in terms of driving and being on a cell phone. When it divides your attention, you should be driving with which attention? primary attention. But when you're on a cell phone, or now the research is showing us, if you're listening to a book on tape, if you have an emotional issue in your life, your pet died, you've had a fight with someone, the stress has the same effect on dividing your attention, and you end up driving with secondary attention, which is just functioning. It's not processing for learning. And so what happens, have you ever been driving and you get there and go, wow, that didn't take very long? Well, it didn't if you never were aware you were doing it, right? The sad thing about that research is that if you are driving and you're in secondary attention because you're distracted or it's divided over an issue, it will take you 2.5 times longer to respond to whatever you need to than a drunk person. It's very dangerous, but we love our cell phone, so we keep doing it. But what does this mean for teaching? It means we need to teach to primary attention, and we need to honor its limitations. Because sustained learning attention for adults is limited. That means that you can focus and sustain your attention to learn for about 20 minutes, give or take 2 minutes for the errors in the research. So that means as an above average IQ adult, you have about 18 to 22 minutes that you can absorb information before you're done. Sponge is full. And we have that research on students, and you may want to write this down. It's 1 minute per chronological age. So if you're a kindergarten teacher, you have a nanosecond before the brain naturally goes grocery shopping. And we're over-identifying attention deficit disorders when we know that the brain relaxes about every 20 minutes and goes grocery shopping, and then it'll refocus. But where I'm going with this is if we don't change the behavior of teaching and we keep trying to lecture to them, and our lectures are exceeding what the above average IQ adult can take in, they're still paying attention, some are acting out, and you can tell when they've broke their primary attention because they move their body a lot. And you can talk and they can look, and students have a perfect behavior of pretending that I'm with you, and they have gone mentally grocery shopping. Or better yet, my own grandkids tell me that, Mimi, we just put our cell phones and text down here, the teachers never know. The thing is we got to start looking at how we learn so that we fix how we teach, because we can't keep doing what we're doing. It's not working. We're still talking, we're still presenting, but the problem is the sponge is full, it hears, but it doesn't store. We've got to change the way we teach. The multiple repeated exposures. Do you know how many times an above average IQ adult, that'd be you, needs to hear something just to get it to short-term memory based on the research? 15 to 17 times. We don't provide near that many exposures in our classrooms. We love to go Monday through Friday and assess for knowledge in 5 days, when we now know that the above average IQ adult, again, will learn 3 words in about 6 weeks. Think of how many new words you're giving students on Monday. So we've got to have this repeated exposures. The sad thing about short-term memory is it's not long-term memory. In order to get something to move from short-term memory to long-term memory, you need on average about 35 exposures. Now you see a huge problem in curriculum design, especially if teachers have written it. I do believe that teachers can write a good lesson. I do believe that teachers can write a good unit of study. I do not support teachers spending their time writing a full curriculum, especially if it's grade to grade. We've studied it for years as authors, and we automatically put those repeated exposures through the year and across the grade levels and through the grade levels so that we don't lose information. How that affects a learner is how it affected you. You've all had plenty of history classes. How many of you feel like you're an expert? And it's because you didn't get a consistent, repeated exposure to where you had enough opportunities to learn it as long-term knowledge. So we need to change how we teach. So can someone hit the next slide, please, since the little remote's not working? Joe? All right, so what else do we know from research? We know that we have almost 50 years actually now that all students, regardless of grade, regardless of content, learn better when they've been taught in small groups. And the reason is they can ask questions and get clarification. Feedback is one of the highest predictors of student learning and success. So we need to see, how can we make that happen? And what's the cost when we don't differentiate and we don't change? 85% of our teaching right now in the United States is still in lecture format, especially from grade 4 up. Even though we have all of that evidence that says if we'll just shift the way we teach, if we'll just differentiate the way we use time, you will get a significant difference. So what we need to do is change the process. That's teaching. If we want the product to change. Changing the standards, changing curriculum. A great curriculum poorly delivered will not work, regardless of who wrote it. So we need to manage teaching time differently. So we need to honor overview. And in your new state revised standards, Texas actually adopted the 20-minute activities. But remember, that's adult research. So if you're an elementary teacher, pre-K, kindergarten, up through grade 5, at least, please remember that 20 minutes sustained attention is adult capacity. It is not children. It needs to be interactive, very interactive, lots of dialogue. We need to have an overview. And the research is telling us also that adults can handle about 3 topics. So when you talk to them in that morning to start your day, don't tell them 15 things that are going to happen that day. Focus and only teach 1 or 2 or 3, and then you're going to pull them back together at some point, and then you can talk about more. And then we need to get into small groups where a group is with the teacher and other students are working collaboratively together. But the most important thing is we need a system for managing that. So can we click? All right, so that means we have to change our daily schedules. I was telling Ed this morning on the way over that the hardest thing for me to get teachers to change is their daily schedule. And the reason for that is it's your daily habit. And we don't like leaving our habits. Adults, we like predictable order, and so do students, by the way, in the research. In fact, the only thing that we have found that offsets chaotic households and that impact, how many of you work with students from chaotic households? That would be all of you. It doesn't have an income. You can be chaotic in your household with high income or low income. Stress overrides your working memory, your learning attention 50% of the time. And if you don't believe me, think about a time when you've had an emotional stress in your life. You're not on your best game. And so students come into our schools and we think because those classrooms are decorated that calms them down and they're safe and we give them food and that sort of thing. But what makes them calm down and frees that working memory up for learning is predictable order. And that's what happens is when you use a management system. So you've got to look at daily schedules and find, how will I manage small group instruction? Well, that works for an elementary schedule, and it also works for middle school and high school. Even if you're in a 45-minute class, you can divide your class into 4 groups. Now, the difference is you would meet 2 of the groups on Monday and Wednesday, 2 of the groups on Tuesday and Thursday, and then on Friday, you'd call back students that need additional instruction or practice or feedback, or you would let the students volunteer. When you make the shift in the daily schedules, and we've got research sites all over the United States, on average, all of our students at least go up 1 grade level, because now they have meaning. Actually, what makes the difference is collaborative practice. Now, what you're probably going is, what are the rest of the kids doing that are not with me, the teacher? This is a question I ask all the time, get asked, and I answer, and that is, they're out working in collaborative practice. You can't provide 35 repeated exposures. You don't have that kind of time. And so you're going to have to let students talk and work together, and that's going to require teaching them how to do that respectfully. And you have a lot of speaking and listening standards. Now, you had them in 2010, but we didn't test them, and because we didn't test them, we didn't teach them. But they're very strong in the new 2017. In fact, the biggest change in the language of the standards in all grade levels is you will not teach memory recall. You will not just identify. The word has changed to describe, discuss, and explain, all oral language based and collaborative practice. So they will be teaching something that you taught last week. It'd be my preference, but several days ago. In our history of the way we design curriculum and in our habit of way we teach, we introduced it and the students use it that day. But sharing the research with you now, knowing that they need all those repeated practices just to get to a talking level, short-term memory, now you can see that that's a mistake. We're asking students to do things they cannot do because they don't own the language of the lesson, regardless of the grade level, regardless of the content area. So, what else do we know? We also, in those collaborative practice, all homework starts at school and none of it is initially graded. And this is kind of a shock because we let the kids all do it together. They always ask me, well, how do we make the kids stay on task? Well, here's your choice. You can do your homework with your friends or you can do it by yourself at home. What do you think they're going to do? Homework is supposed to be successful practice, not independent practice to show mastery. And we send homework home when they have not had the sufficient instruction at school with feedback from either the teacher or the peers, and then they don't do well. So homework is kind of getting a hit, and some schools, Texas led this in the United States, have decided not to have homework. Homework's not a bad thing, it's the way we use it that makes it bad. We don't provide enough instruction and practice at school before we send it home and make it independent practice. So collaborative practice, and some of the biggest issues in 2017 standards are going to be speaking, being respectful, sharing the talking time, the speaking and listening standards in kindergarten. I don't know an adult that can do them in kindergarten. And if I had more time to work with you, I'd prove it to you. You have to stay on the topic under discussion. You have to share the talking time, ladies. You have to, you have to use words of the speaker. You have to listen for the speaker purpose, not what you want to say. And that has to happen for 3 exchanges. And I would love it if I had the time to model to you. We listen for what we want to say, not to what the speaker is trying to say to us. I'll give you an example. One time I was flying and my luggage went north, but I was south. So I called my husband because my speaker purpose was I wanted him to be as miserable as I was. But unfortunately, he, like many adults, wanted to give me a solution. I didn't need a solution. I figured it out already. I didn't need to check my luggage. I got that far. Click, I hung up, right? We often do that. That's one of the things we're going to teach our students to do. How are we going to change? It's cheap and it's easy, and you're going to get a handout. I've provided it, and you'll get it at some point after today, that shows you how to use a rotation system. How many of you have ever used one? If you taught pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, you're scared to teach in whole class. It's just poster board and Velcro, but it works. At the top, you separate your students into groups. At the bottom, you rotate the things on the bottom. Now, I have words on mine because in training, I use that to show you how to manage flexible grouping. You would never write those. Middle school and high school especially, we use decals, not cute, colored blocks of the colleges that we think you might want to attend. We name your groups because we intend for you to look forward, or whatever sports group. But we use this simple rotation system to ensure that we have the opportunity to work with students and get in the face and watch them for their response to instruction and give feedback at the point of need. So you just rotate it. So we need more collaborative practice. That's going to develop the skill sets for learning, which are word knowledge, deep word knowledge. Ed and I have been talking about this for 30 minutes. It's one thing to talk about teaching sounds for reading, but it doesn't do any good if you don't know what the word meant. You don't have comprehension. And phonological awareness, which is relatively new in the research, and I added a slide to show you what that is. I'll show it to you in a moment. So what we've learned is that learning is very orderly. Very orderly. Learning to read is orderly, instruction needs to be orderly, and it needs that consistent, repeated practice. You're going to get a copy of all these slides. When you get it, look at this one and mark it and hold on to it. If this is a learning progression, and it is, straight out of the research, on cognitive brain thinking, learning, and how we hang on to information. Please note that the very first level of comprehension is not reading people, it's listening. If you can't hear and understand what I say because you don't know the word meaning, you are automatically at risk for being a reader. And yet our lessons don't start day one at any grade level, and it becomes more and more important at grade 3 and up, because the more challenging the meaning of the word is, the more careful we have to be about teaching word meaning. We want to teach reading, but look how far down the food chain reading is. There's a lot of things we need to learn before we read. We need to be able to hear the word. And then it goes into a silent period. And you have a silent period. How many of you know words that you hear, but you don't speak them every day? They're in your silent period. How many of you read a word, but it's not a word that you speak every day? It's in your silent period. Do you know what the silent period average amount of time for an adult is for using a new word? 10 months. I didn't say 10 minutes. That's what we do in our classroom. 10 months before you really know a word. And if you speak other than a language other than English, it's 12 months because you've got to make that sound transfer. We're asking students to even answer questions before they own the word and own the understanding. And then the third bullet is talking. And notice it develops in a progression. First you just say the word, that's called labeling, and then it goes to phrases, and then it goes to sentences. But we want students out in sentences long before they even own the word. And the reason is it's not that we don't know better, we didn't have the research. So we need to provide the professional development that closes the gap between what we know in research and what we are doing in classrooms. The fourth bullet is oral language expressive fluency. Those are fancy words for talking without pausing. Pausing is your number one enemy. When a student is pausing in their oral language, they are having difficulty retrieving the word because sound and vocabulary storage are not in the same place. Now, the brain grows forward every 4 years, so there's some ages around 4, 4.5, and 8 and 12, 16, 20, 24, that brain growth is a little out of sync, and they will talk, that. But it'll naturally fix itself. But here's the deal. The first 4 bullets are teaching. And that's what we want more of in classrooms. We want more explanation of what a word means. We want more teacher modeling, and you will hear this word used this way, because English has a lot of multiple meaning words and it's confusing. We want kids talking more. That's that repeated practice, and it helps them retrieve the word from memory. And we want them to talk a whole lot about it as then they begin to read, and you've been modeling reading to and with. And I've had many a middle and high school teacher tell me they should have learned to read in elementary school. And here's what I would say to you. They did. They read elementary text. You have to keep teaching reading, the word meaning, how the word sounds, how it is used in language, and then you carry that to reading a text. Reading and writing are practice skills. That's why I'd ask you, if I walk through your schools, would I see more practice or would I see more teaching? And I hope I would see more teaching before we go to reading. Just to help you always know, especially administrators, when a student uses their hand, they have moved to practice. I don't care what age and what they're doing. Manipulating blocks or writing. The minute you engage this hand, turning pages, whatever, you have gone to the student applying the skill. We need to teach the skill better before we move them. We're so focused of wanting them to read and to write, but people were not doing the foundational instruction and practice enough that we can help these kids read. So the simple way to remember all of that research is watch me. They need to hear it. They need to hear the sound of the word and the oral language. They need to see it. That means understand it. And they need to say it. That's your learning triangle. Hear, see, say before they do anything. And if you don't provide enough of this, hear, see, say, you've put the student at risk for failure. So I put this one in here because a lot of us aren't familiar with that term, phonological awareness. If you read English backwards, it's not as beautiful as Spanish. Spanish tells you what you're talking about before it elaborates. English does the opposite, and so you've added too many words in your explanation. By the way, you as an above average IQ adult, if I'm teaching you something new, I should be using sentences with 10 or less words. If you were teaching students that are under grade 2, it would be 3 to 5 word sentences. I want us to think about how long our sentences are and how we don't stop in between them as I'm doing now because we're always in a hurry. We're speaking 140 to 160 words a minute. Do you really think students can pull those words that quickly? We don't even stop at punctuation. There's a lot of ways we can change teaching and clarify the meaning, but someone needs to help share this research and teach us how. It's not our fault. Turn and tell somebody next to you, I knew it wasn't my fault. Do it now, please. So phonological awareness is the awareness of how the logic is said in a word. They need to hear the sound parts, if you will. This is going to be a very simple explanation, but say these 2 words to yourself. What are they? Everyone, teacher, and... Okay, so but when I pull them apart, that's not how they're pronounced. Teacher, root word, suffix, which now Greek and Latin roots are back in you and will be assessed. We start them in 3rd grade. Because we took them out. We took this kind of phonological awareness, only back then we called it phonemic, but that's when you work with letter sound for decoding to read. This is different. It's working with syllables, roots, and affixes. Look at education. There's no J in that word. And we all say education. When we don't pronounce the words correctly, you should have a dictionary. By the way, it's in every one of your standards in 2017. You will look up how the word is separated so that we learn to say it correctly, because how we say it is how we read it. And when I've been trained to read that a J says J, and there's no J in that word, it stops my brain, and my brain goes, whoa, what's that? Education, but education? Mismatch, it breaks my comprehension. So that's why that standard has changed. So the bottom line is we've got to figure out how we can manage flexible grouping and get more rigor, not difficulty, in our teaching so that we can match what's happening in these standards. So how are we going to make it happen? First of all, you need to know the difference between difficulty and rigor. And the second thing is we need to look at those outcomes, and you need to look early so that you understand the impact before you have to implement next year. And then we need to make sure we figure out how to manage small groups. And I would tell you this I would tackle before 2019. So difficulty does not equal rigor. Making students read more difficult text will not increase their student achievement. It will not enhance their comprehension. And in fact, we'll fail more kids than we ever have. What we need to increase is the rigor. Rigor is, do you understand it? Rigor is more about comprehension. Difficulty occurs when we don't provide the teaching. Rigor is what we're after. So it's the cognitive demand. It's the demand on the brain. If the task is hard, then we need to teach the children how to mentally manage that rigor, mentally process that. We need to do more modeling and talking about. So what matters is how we help students interact with text and get a deeper understanding. And I would tell your administrators and you teachers as well, you only have 2 choices. You can go for coverage or you can go for comprehension, and the one that's going to pay off will be comprehension. It's not that you read 50 books well, it's that because you can't in the amount of time you have, or that you cover so many units. It's more important that we teach students how to manage text and get to comprehension. So there's a matrix, and it's free off the website. This is the basis of everything in the country. Your new assessments that are forthcoming, any of the report cards. How many of you remember Bloom's taxonomy? Remember studying that? Okay, so that's about, is the task complex? It has nothing to do with thinking. How many of you are aware of Webb's DOK levels? That's about the level of thinking. And so what this person has done, I write with her, Karen Hess, is she's put those together because I'll show you why. When we look at this up close, there are 4 levels of thinking, rigor, in Webb's. And so level 1 and level 2 is basically recall, find text evidence, anything that's right there. But when you move out to levels 3 and 4, it's using a lot of resources. It's analyzing, synthesizing, describing using evidence. It's a higher level of thinking. It's a higher level of rigor. And here's what's happening. In our classrooms, most of the instruction is on level 1 and 2. And when you look at curriculums that teachers have developed themselves, it's still on level 1 and 2. When you look at a curriculum that's been designed by people that, like authors, not saying that we're any different, we've just studied it, we carry it on out to level 3 and 4. And the reason that some of our students appear to be doing well in our classes and then they bomb our state assessments and we're surprised is they're assessed on a higher level of thinking. And the way that we get them to that higher level of thinking is through dialogue and modeling and helping them how we would handle the text. We can't expect them to do this by themselves. So, how many of you know this nursery rhyme? But I'm going to teach you how we have to get you to a higher level of thinking, because the level of complexity, the difficulty of this nursery rhyme is 3 times higher than most adults can read. So I have to give you some background as your good little teacher. Our nursery rhymes were written during the era, 1800s, during religious prosecution. And you would be killed or put in prison for writing about your faith, so they wrote in parables, which are very challenging and rigorous. So how do we need to know the word, the meaning of the words. This is author's craft and structure. And by the way, it's in every one of your standards in Texas in the 2017. Humpty Dumpty, how do we illustrate Humpty Dumpty with a what? It means life. So the author has used words, this is their craft and structure, has used words to mean something else. Humpty Dumpty, life. What does a wall do? It divides between 2 things. And in this particular thing, it divides between right and wrong, or good and evil. So life has 2 choices, is the first sentence. Humpty Dumpty, that's life, had a great fall. Great fall, 100% of the time in religious literature, means sin. Bad choice. Life has 2 choices, and if you make the wrong choice. All the king's horses in that era, king's horses was your money, your wealth. All the money and all the king's men was your army, your power. So all the money and power won't put your life back together again. And that's what this parable means. Isn't that interesting? When we go to a different level of thinking, but it took a teacher to teach you how to manage that text, to get to the true meaning. Just because you could read that text, the words aren't hard, the text is familiar, but it doesn't do any good. I need to help you go to the rigor of understanding it. So I ask more rigorous questions, especially the 4th one. You're talking about level 4. How does that message apply to people today? Now I'm taking you to a different level, not just reading the words. That's what rigorous is. So now you do this one. If I made you do this in small group, nobody would talk. And it's because you're only at listening comprehension. You haven't had enough guided practice. I'll do it with you, for you. Jack and Jill is man and woman. They went up the hill, Mount Zion, fetch a pail of water. That's baptism. Jack fell down, oh bad Jack, and he lost his crown, that crown in heaven, and Jill came tumbling after. This one means, men, you're the leadership here, and when you blow it, we follow you. I'm just kidding. All right, so, just kidding. All right, so, The bottom line here is increasing the difficulty of the task, making them read more complex text. That seems to be the big deal. People, we're not even back where we left. We started dumbing down textbooks in 1963 because our student achievement wasn't comparable to international studies. And so we dumbed down our text. And when we dumb down the text, we dumb down the teaching. When you dumb down the text and the teaching, you dumb down student performance. It's not hard to figure out how we got where we are. In 1980, we were the #1 country in the world that got students ready for college and careers. Do you know where we are now? 28th. Well, that doesn't sound too bad. The whole world's in. No, there's only 32 players in the game. We have fallen significantly. So elevating the textbook rigor or complexity is not the problem. Our students now read books that have pictures and all kinds of help supports in them that we didn't have when we were a student. We have enabled trying to help our readers achieve, but what we've got to change is the teaching. We've got to get that rigor up so that we can do it. So we've got to increase the rigor, so we increase comprehension, and in order to do that, you need to know what it is you need to get to. So your TEKS, your standards, it's interesting, Texas, people always go, we don't have Common Core. Yes, you do. I've read every one of your standards. They're all embedded in Texas. We just wrote them ourselves. And Indiana copied us. Now we revised ours, and we left Indiana out in the cold. We don't know what Nebraska's doing, and we're behind them, but Oklahoma copied Texas. So 48 of the states now have the exact same standards, but people, there was no author of Common Core. We took committees, and we took all the grade levels. Each committee took a grade level. So each committee looked at the 50 states' standards. And then they found which standards were common across the 50 states. That's where you get the word common. And they put them together as a group. That's where you get the word core, and that's what Common Core is. But everybody freaked out because they didn't want to read and figure out what we were really doing, and it's our fault. We didn't disseminate the information correctly, and we went, oh, it's Obamaism, socialism, communism, or any other ism. And yet what we were trying to do is get a common language, because schools to schools and state to state, we all make up our own acronyms. We can't even have a discussion nationally. Texas has written their standards. They are not comprehensive, just like Common Core isn't. And the reason they're not comprehensive is their end of the year outcomes, what the student needs to know and be able to do at the end of the year. All of that comes to get there, the progression of skills and timing and pacing is for you to decide, and that's the discussion your district needs to be in. So, as a McGraw-Hill author, which I'm proud to be, we have to know all your standards in all 50 states. So I had all of those with me. And I put them all on one big piece of paper, which you're going to have access to. But I want you to understand that the verbs in the standards are some of the biggest changes in your Texas standards, because they identify the type of thinking and then the complexity and rigor. So these look like, you can't see it, you don't need to see it, but each grade level, I cut and paste all of your standards on one piece of paper. Because when I had to flip through all those pieces of paper, I didn't want to read it. I also developed a way to color code these, and then notice mine are laminated. After I color code it, I have it laminated so I can use a dry erase marker and circle those at which I want to apply. But the best thing about the standards, and notice we have them for every grade level through grade 8, and Ed at the McGraw-Hill booth is going to give you the little private website of where you can get these. So you've got them. But here's what we need. We need you to understand that the standards are developed in a progression now, and they build upon each other. And there is no forgiveness. So we really need pre-K and kindergarten and first grade and second grade. We need for you to get word knowledge in and oral language more than anything, and how to behave at school and collaborate. We need a management system that gives us more consistency there, because by the time you get up to middle school, these are all your standards. They got to listen, ask questions, work together. And when you get up to middle school, it's huge. What are the biggest changes in your TEKS? It's in thinking. They all require a deeper, more rigorous thinking. Also in the speaking and the language, more about word knowledge, more about word structure. In the reading, notice the very first big change is introducing words phonologically, not phonemically to read them. You have to hear the syllables before you go to the individual sounds. And in research, everything's develop a plan. They're trying to get order into that student so they have a skill set. And then when you look at the changes in middle and high school, they're the exactly same, but at a lot more rigorous level. Spelling is huge in your standards. Writing, Texas is the only state that requires kids print the letters of the alphabet before the end of first grade. And we require it in kindergarten. You also have changed, those of you that are teaching second grade, you will be teaching to make the cursive alphabet. I don't know why. Because you don't have to write it in a word till third grade, into third grade. So we could talk to the school board about that gap. But the bottom line is we've got to get the rigor up in the teaching in order for students to have the type of thinking and behavior to achieve the rigor in these standards. That one says standards are not going to fix the rigor. We've already tried elevating standards and rigor and all of that. Teaching is the difference. You make the difference. You're the difference maker for these students' lives. So what do we need to do? We need to know the end of year outcomes. That means you need to have these discussions about your standards. You need to have them at the grade level, and then you need to meet and put kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. Look where a standard is introduced and look for mastery, because some of your standards are not mastered now for 2 to 3 years. That's why report cards are going to have to change. You can't assess for mastery if it's not required. And a lot of your writing standards, especially in elementary, you have 2 to 3 years now to master a skill. Then you've got to know your students. That means get in your small groups. The number one predictor of student achievement is a relationship with you. And number 2 is instruction that makes sense. And the third one is phonological awareness, being able to hear it correctly. That's how you differentiate instruction. Get a management system, improve the rigor of the teaching. So you can write me if you have questions, but I will always answer them back to the school district, and then they will write to you. I've written a lot of books on this, but I'm not here to sell books because you don't need to. You need a rotation chart, a big sheet with the TEKS, and a lot of collaboration at your district level. Thank you very much.